Hello, welcome to this course. This course is for you and it's about transportation. It is dedicated to Hamar and I want to thank you very much for allowing me to be your instructor. You know that everything we do has a situation that always involves our specialty, our service, and on this occasion, Hamar has hired me to transmit all this information to you through the standards. My name is Ángeles Carpinteiro. I am a pharmaceutical chemist and biologist, and I'm specialized in the whole question of food, medicines, cosmetics, herbal remedies. On this occasion, I would like to share with you my experience with this course that I have prepared. Directed especially for you and with great pleasure, I'm at your service and we are going to begin. Well, here I would like to present the agenda that we are going to have and I would like you to write down if you have a notebook. If you want to ask your questions and somehow if there are any doubts so that you can send them to us and with pleasure all the doubts, questions, any comments, any situation that is seen in the course, well, we will be glad to be at your disposal to answer you and give you answers to any doubts you may have. Please have your notebook and we hope that all your doubts will be solved during this course. Well, as an agenda we have that all Mexican standards, as we know, are mandatory and are governing especially those of medicines, food and cosmetics, which is the one we are going to base ourselves on today. Are based on and governed by COFEPRIS. COFEPRIS is the Federal Commission Against Sanitary Risks, and they intervene in any risk situation either by thinning or closing. It is important that we carry out our work with that question of being dedicated. Experts with knowledge, with all the tools that are given to us so that we can make good use of them. I would like to comment that, for example, if you make a medicine, a food, a cosmetic, everything that is involved from raw materials, manufacturing, labor, production, packing is very important. That is why transportation is becoming more and more important every day. Why? Because something that, if it has already been produced, if we have already taken it, we have to take care of it because it will reach the consumer. And if we put ourselves in the role of consumers, we always want the best. When we see a butter box or something that is coming out, we don't really care in which part of the production or in which part of the warehouse or in which part of the transport it was damaged. What we want is a good product. That is why it is our responsibility and our commitment to do things also in the point that we are interested with, which is the transportation. And well, in this agenda, as I mentioned, we are going to look at the whole issue of standards. What it is objective and field of application. What are the reference, the definitions. We often understand many things, but we don't know where to look for them. Well, precisely in these standards, both for drugs and for food and cosmetics, we find all the definitions, symbols, which sometimes when we arrive at the companies, we see that they have some symbols, some abbreviations, and that it is also important that we begin to understand what they are talking about or what they are referring to. So, well, right now we are going to focus on this part that is very important in transportation, both for medicines and for food and cosmetics, which, as I was saying, are products that are basic for us as humans, and what we are looking for most is that they are not going to be contaminated, that they are not going to have any functional problem. And well, there is also the whole part of the documentation that we have to be ready. As you might have noticed in the deliveries of some products and some services that you already have, suddenly you are asked to have your checklist, to have certain documentation, because I want to tell you that these products are even stricter and there is more dedication and we have to have everything absolutely more detailed, more documented in some way, because in addition, this information is very useful for us, as I mentioned, for a federal authority such as COFEPRIS to carry out a verification. We must have the record, the documentation, and everything we're going to see now. So the important thing is that they are doing it. that they are implementing, and that they are doing it day by day, not leaving anything in vacuum, but continually to apply it. And well, we're also going to see what the equipment and the instrument is. For us, well, as far as transportation is concerned, we understand that we have transportation and that we must take care of it, because it is the basic tool of our work. So it has to be impeccable. In personnel, as we have already mentioned, it also plays a very important role, a very fundamental role, and you also in some way have to follow that chain so that these products arrive and the consumers are completely grateful. And above all, that it fulfills the function, the product that they expect. The cleanliness of transportation and all the places where we move and where we go, including ourselves as people, also has a lot of influence. Pest control, because sometimes also they say, well, it is because it is transportation. If we do not pay attention and suddenly we are there, and well, I think we have noticed that in some neighborhoods there are sewers where there are rats, many insects, or we are in the area that we do not realize. Well, we always have to be alert, and that is why pests also play an important role in our transportation, and we need to be trained. That is the most important part, because on many occasions we say, I didn't know, nobody told me, or I didn't understand, or I didn't know where to look for the information. Well, training also plays a very important and fundamental role. That is why I am here with you to accompany you in this course. And well, we will be at your service for anything else. Thank you. As I was telling you, we do not currently have a regulation specifically for transportation, but we do have standards for what will be good manufacturing practices for drugs such as O59. What you see there as NOM for Norma Oficial Mexicana, which are mandatory as I had told you, and in order to commercialize and carry out our activities, we need to comply with these standards. And now that I'm telling you the year, it is very important that we are always up to date, because sometimes the standards tend to be modified. A short time ago, for example, there was a modification in the packing standards of the food declaration tables. So there was a lot of noise about what was going on, and it had to be updated. So we always have to be aware that the standards are enforced. We can check directly with Cofepris or in the official gazette that the standards we're applying are the current ones. And well, I was telling you that this is the one on medicine, O59. The 251, which is from 2009, talks about all food practice, and it also mentions a little bit of what we are looking at: transportation, hygiene, and everything we're going to discuss. And well, for the good practice of cosmetics, we have the standard 259, which came into force recently in 2022. This area of cosmetics was, as it were, not very well attended, but seeing the importance with all the problems we have had with pandemics and all the issues of allergies, it also beginning to take a lot of importance. Why? Because many of the products that we consume in terms of cosmetics go to the skin. And as you know, that any contamination problem is also transmitted through the skin, either through the scalp, for example, in shampoos, creams, or makeup. That is why it is also very important that in transportation we take into account how we are transporting ourselves and the condition in which we have to do it. And all this can be found in the regulations or many times in the transportation area. Well, I was telling you that you're going to have to be with your customer as well as with yourselves in the place and the place where you are going to deliver. They will have to have agreements, they will have to negotiate, and they will have to know the policies. Because each company has its internal policies and can determine when, how, and how the conditions have to be. For example, of transportation and personnel, but also where they are going to deliver. They can set their schedules, at what time, in what place, and under what condition they have to do it. So, they have to broaden this awareness of working not only for Hamar, but also for the companies that are their customers, as well as for the companies to which they are going to deliver. Well, all these standards, what this course is doing and summarizing and also agglomerating these three standards, so that once the strictest is the one for medicines. Based on it, we can see that it also applies to both food and cosmetics. So, the objective and scope of application of these standards is to establish the minimum requirements necessary for the manufacturing process of medicines, food and cosmetics for human use. Remember that transportation is also one of the most important parts because the product is ready to reach the consumer, and it is very important that it also arrives impeccable. And well, the field of application is mandatory. What does this mean? It means that wherever we want to commercialize medicines, food, cosmetics, we are obliged to comply with these provisions or requirements contained in these standards. And well, one of the most important parts is that the standards contain reference. What does it mean? Sometimes we cannot rely on a single standard. There are other standards that have reference and we have to know them. We give you here several examples. For example, for the units, it will be standard 08. For standard 030, to see also the tolerance. There are times when, for example, some people handle the units and do not put them correctly. For example, grams with a large G. For example, kilocalories with a large K. So, all these standards complement us. That is why they are used as a reference. And well, it is very important for you to know that if you want to expand more on the subject of regulations, we also have this reference that go hand in hand with the standards, and we are fine now. Well, it is very important for you to know that these three standards are based precisely on good distribution, storage, and transportation practice. As I was saying, we do not yet have a standard that only focuses on transportation, although we don't know that these standards state that both storage and distribution include transportation. So, what is done in the warehouse, what is done in distribution must also go concurrently with what would be transportation. And well, they are a very important part of quality assurance, whether for foodstuffs, medicines, or cosmetics. Through several stages, as we are saying, we cannot let a manufacturing process go to waste. Let's give an example. If a food is contaminated, the whole batch is destroyed. A company can produce a batch for many units and it can be a destruction of millions. That is why it is very important that we have this awareness of maintaining the importance of complying with this goods practice in transportation as well. Another thing that also is mentioned in the definitions is calibration. So, what is calibration? I can have instruments and maybe I do not consider it important, but it is very important. For example, in a sanitary verification that I say what I'm doing, I am doing it well. And let's take, for example, temperature, which is something very delicate. For example, temperature, I can use thermometers and I can say, well, I am taking the temperature, but how much do I know that my thermometer is right? So, there are places where some equipment or some instruments that we use have to be calibrated and they give us a certification that our thermometer or any other equipment is okay. So, that is why it is important for us to know that we are doing it well, and that we use the equipment, use some instruments, we do them in the best way. The qualification, both of personal and now that we are taking this training, and that there has to be an evaluation as we did, for example, in high school, where they told us whether we had passed or failed the subject. Everything is important because, for example, COFEPRIS, in a verification or in an audit, they can ask if the person is qualified. In the case of equipment, that they are also qualified. And there are other companies that are dedicated, for example, in the case of thermometers, to check that they are working and they that they are suitable and qualified. And in the case, for example, of us, we are also seeing that you as personnel have and meet certain requirements in your evaluation. Cofepris, you only ask for a minimum score of 8. Well, that is why I was telling you. To solve any doubt, any situation that remains, well, we will be glad to be here for you. And training, as we are saying, is also one of the very important activities that we have to take into account. You could say that companies should decide how they are going to train their personnel every year, when, what topics, and well, how they are going to evaluate their qualification. And you will have a great opportunity there because in some way everyone is growing. As a company, as Hamar starts to grow, you can also learn a lot more and also give yourselves the opportunity to grow. And then, in the definition is also part of what we find. I put here as most important thing in terms of definitions, well, contamination. I believe that many of us hear about pollution, contamination, but to a certain extent we do not take it into account that it is pollution. And so it is the presence of physical, chemical, or biological entities that can be found somewhere. Let's take, for example, physical. Somebody leaves a piece of gum and apparently we say, oh, it's just a piece of gum. Yes, but the gum and the person, what was he doing? He was chewing it and it had saliva on it. And that saliva can have bacteria, especially if it is a person who is sick. Imagine it. For example, a piece of chewing gum were to contaminate food, medicines, or cosmetics. It would really be something very delicate, and even more so if we are going to deliver it to a place where it will be detected. Also, for example, hand washing. Many times, there are people who, for example, go to the bathroom and do not wash their hands. So, there is a very high source of contamination. Therefore, all these points, all these definitions are very important, that we become aware of how to apply them and how to carry them out. You will hear cross-contamination a lot, especially in the area of medicines, food and cosmetics. And what it refers to. Many times in the same area, for example, food, we are going to give that example. If I am preparing raw chicken, but here I have food that is already cooked, let's suppose that in a restaurant someone wants to make a sandwich. Then they are completely different, and cross-contamination will be that from something raw such as chicken, salmonella, for example, and the person did not wash their hands properly and took the ham to prepare the sandwich, it will be contaminated. So, that is why we have to be very conscious that in our working hours, it does not matter if it is transportation. If I take boxes of something raw and then I take boxes of something that was already a finished product, then I can also pass a contamination without realizing it. So, that is a type of cross-contamination, and in the area of food, medicines, and cosmetics, this issue is handled very regularly. Contaminant. Well, we also have many impurities, many things that can remain that sometimes we do not see. And above all, particles that, although they may seem defenseless, we must see that they must be cleaned and sometimes even disinfected. There are things, as I was saying, that we cannot notice. Maybe there was in one area a piece of gum stuck, but maybe the saliva stayed there. Maybe the physical particle was removed but the saliva remains. So, we have to look for methods that really help us to disinfect and remove this source of contamination. There is also an acceptance criterion in terms of a specification, and you must also be aware of this. Here, I invite you to make sure that every time you have to deliver a food, a medicine, or a cosmetic, you know the customer, you know what you're going to deliver, what the specifications are, because in many occasions we are going to assume, for example, that a product such as an egg is delivered to you. To give an example, then maybe you have to check that it is clean, that the boxes are closed, that they are labeled, and if these specifications are not met, but you perceive it and deliver it to the person where you are going to take it, whether it is a warehouse or the person who is acquiring it, maybe he will tell you that he cannot accept it, but in the transport you have already taken it. So, You also have to start getting to know the products, have a dialogue with the customers, and have them give you the specifications, and many times you will also have to go into the standards to see what criteria they are going to use, what specifications they have to comply with so that you can also comply with these products. Quarantine. In these three areas, food, medicines, and cosmetics, generally you will also hear about quarantine. And what does quarantine mean? When a product is delivered and there is a doubt that there is any contamination or that it does not come well or that its specifications are not correct, they will hold it for 40 days because they will send it for analyze, and as soon as the analyze is delivered, they will deliver it to you and release it. So if you have a product that they tell you, let's see, we have doubts about the product and it is going to remain in quarantine, this happens mostly in cosmetics and medicines. Not so much in food because in food there are many foods that are perishable, so there is sometimes a quick decision is made as to whether it is accepted or not, whether it is destroyed or not, whether it is rejected or not. This is why especially true for medicines and cosmetics that go to quarantine, but it's not the reason why they go to quarantine. And also, when there is a deviation or non-conformity, let's suppose that a medicine is sent but maybe the labels, the not number is not correct, or it does not have the right weight in a foodstuff, then you can also say in your checklist, you know what I was told that I had to deliver, I say it corresponds. With medicines, we have to be very careful because there are several presentations. It can be a medicine and the dosage can be completely different. It can be, as we have seen, that sometimes it comes for children, sometimes it comes for adults, sometimes it comes in a different presentation, in syrup. So we have to be very careful because sometimes there is a lot to do. But we have to focus on how we are going to do it. The people who deliver it and the places where we are going to deliver it, and always with the documentation. With the records, we'll sign, we'll date it, and well, it also includes the definitions that we have a work instruction. It is a teamwork that we will have to be done by everyone. Who is going to be the boss, who is going to tell them where they are going, what they are going to do, but also each person has to be responsible. What they do is done according to this work instruction. So it has to be detailed, it has to be written very clearly, and we also have to know the degree of each one, how each one is involved in this type of work and in their area. Inputs, they are the words that you will find a lot in the definitions. And that inputs refer precisely to medicines or cosmetics and well, the food area. You will hear it more as food-based, but you might also hear inputs as a general term for the finished product. Cleaning is also a process that involves programs, records, people who are dedicated to do it, and also people who do it really well, with equipment and also with the substance they use that are also recommended. Here in the cleaning process, I'm going to recommend that everyone has to enter into this level of inspection, supporting and helping the cleaning person. Because many times, what we have observed is that, for example, chlorine, let's give an example of chlorine. Most of the time, people do not read the instructions, so they use many chemical substances such as chlorine just as a trickle, but it can become toxic, or maybe in certain areas it cannot be handled with certain products. We must be very careful and also give people their cleaning training so that they know how to use it and what quantity to use it, if it is suitable and not suitable, and that they also get a lot of support from the people in these areas. For example, medicine, food, cosmetics, because sometimes they recommend cleaning products that are suitable and that do not harm, especially in the food area. For example, we hear a lot that they are cleaning products precisely for the food area that do not cause any problem to food, either in aromas or in a high concentration. So it is important that they are food grade. For example, that they are food grade, but they also have some things for medicines and cosmetics, all this for cleaning. The quality manual, perhaps many times we do not see that in the process people have their quality manual, and it's precisely one of the most important parts. Wanting to maintain quality for everything. But in transportation we could say, well, What does a quality manual have to do with it? Well, because it can be contained instructions of what we do and how we do it. And this document can also be used as a system in which things are agreed upon, in which we can see the policies, in which we can see the quality objectives that are established, because the transportation service also includes that we do it with quality and that will depend on us as people and also on our documentation, on our records that everything is up to date. We hear the word sanitation a lot, which is really a term that it is used at a general level, at a global level, worldwide. But in Mexico, we use it more as disinfecting. And why it is important to disinfect? Because washing is not the same as disinfecting. And here maybe you can see if you do in your homes or in your work areas is only cleaning with soap and water. Or if you're really disinfecting with specific cleaning agents that even tell you that if you use this amount you're going to eliminate bacteria or eliminate viruses, as we have seen now. That we have to eliminate above all viruses and bacteria, we are looking for all these types of products that really provide this degree of disinfection. It is the ability of people to reconstruct everything they did. And such an hour I left, and such an hour I deliver. I passed through such and such a place, and this is achieved precisely with the documentation. If I keep my records, if I keep everything in accordance, if I agree with others, I can do it. And why it is important? In the area of medicines, food, and cosmetics, traceability becomes extremely important. Why? Because let us suppose that a batch was delivered, and sometimes we have heard that Coverpris says that a batch has to be recalled. Maybe 1,000,000 pieces, maybe 1,000, maybe 500, whatever the amount it is. If I did a service with that company or with a distributor or with whomever, and they tell me, hey, you delivered that batch, then we must have the records, the formats, the people, the place, and make the traceability who delivered it. At what time did they deliver it? When did they deliver it? Where did they deliver it? How many pieces did they receive? Who received them? Well, up to the moment when our work is finished, maybe from the person who delivered it for us, that happened in the transport, or to the person who received it. So traceability is very important, because if you do not have it, imagine in these areas, everything you will have to look for or how to look for it in order to find what you are asking for. So this information is very important. Also, what we are going to find in these standards is that they talk about symbols and abbreviations. And this is very important because sometimes we already see them as technical words and suddenly we leave them. But we must not leave them. We must know where they are found and why they are used, and well, here are some examples of the symbols and abbreviations that are most used in these standards, both for food, medicines, and cosmetics. For example, we have the percentage. So we generally handle many things in percentage. We also have the plus and the minus. We have the greater than and less than. We also have what will be degrees, especially when we are handling temperatures in degrees Celsius. We have the kilopascal in terms of pressure, the micrometer, the millimeter, the cubic meter. Here I gave you an example that I would like you to see. For example, the thermometer in what units we handle, generally in degrees Celsius. And I would like you to write down in your notebook what other type of instrument you handle with these units that we are mentioning are very important and that are part of what are you handling day by day in the instruments that we are handling during transportation. And well, there are also symbols and abbreviations that sometimes you have contact with people from the warehouses where you are going to deliver, and as I was saying, also from the warehouses where they give you the product as well as where they deliver it. So sometimes they use many terms that suddenly we say what they are talking about. So they are generally abbreviations that we also find in the standards. For example, they can talk about good storage and distribution practice, where transport is generally included. They can tell you have a manual of good storage and distribution practice, so they are really referring to that. They can also talk to them about good documentation practice,
on what we are talking about, that you have records, manuals, temperatures. Here I would like you to know if you keep records of temperatures, if you have a format, how you are managing it, how you control it. I don't know if you have been working with food and medicines for some time. They are being introduced, but it's very important that you know that you have to do it. But do not worry, because later we will see how easy it looks in all the documentation. One of the sources that you also have to develop are corrective actions and preventive actions. Here, they are by acronyms. In English, it is handled as layer. When you hear layer, it refers to this: corrective actions and preventive action. For example, when something happens to us, well, generally, we also have to write it down. We have to keep a record: when, at what time, and how did it happen. And with this, we will be able to do these actions because the situation is not so much what happens from one thing. For example, if a truck runs out of gas and they stop, we have to see how the action happened and how did it happen. And with this, we will be able to take these actions because the situation is not so much. It's not so much that happens from one thing. For example, if a truck runs out of gas, they stop. We have to see how the action happened and how I'm going to see it from the corrective and how I'm going to prevent. And we will have to take a manual or an instruction manual so that when this happens, before leaving, people can check where they're going to go, how far they are going to get with the gas, or what they have to do. So all these parts of anything that happens will enter into what is called corrective actions, preventive actions, and many companies may lose us for them, especially in the transportation area. That is, for example, they may be asked, hey, what will happen if maybe the temperature is not working, or if anything happens, what will you do, or how are you going to handle it? Sometimes they ask for these manuals. That is why I'm telling them, because it is very important. And while we also mentioned COVID quiz, which is the Federal Commission for Protection Against Sanitary Risk, many times people are afraid of COVID quiz. If it is a federal authority, they work in two ways. Sometimes they make the decision to visit a company. It is random, but also many times it is due to complaints, which is the most common. If a person feels that something was wrong, or that something is not right, they can complain, and then COVID quiz can make a sanitary verification visit to see how they are doing their work. And then comes the relative humidity, which is managed as RH. Remember that relative humidity must also be taken into account in transportation, because it's not the same that we are in Mexico City as we're in warmer areas, or in areas where it is colder or where the humidity changes. And this also influences, especially when we are delivering products such as medicines, cosmetics, and foodstuffs. Sometimes, some products have special specifications. For example, keep at certain humidity or in the dark, or keep at a certain temperature. So they often have to be prepared because their own customer may tell them, well, this product makes specific or special conditions. So you also have to know them. And what they are mean by the relative humidity they need. As well, there is also what is called HVAC, which is their air conditioning system, and you will find it that way because they are the acronym in English, and the NA that is not applicable. For example, if you put a transport, you have to comply with this. But they put NA, which means that does not apply to them, only maybe to the warehouse or other things. So, generally, if you see a NA, it means not applicable.